Somewhere in China, around the 5th century BC, an old man walked up to a border crossing. He was done. Done with the imperial court, done with politics, done with watching civilization choose ambition over wisdom, noise over stillness, force over flow. He was leaving, walking into the wilderness to disappear. The border guard recognized him, knew who he was, and before he would let the old man pass, before he would let this particular mind vanish forever into the mountains, he made one request. Write it down, whatever you know, whatever you've understood. Before you go, write it down. The old man stopped, sat, and in a single night, or so the story tells us, he wrote 81 short verses, 5,000 Chinese characters, the entire thing small enough to hold in your hands. Then he walked into the mountains and was never seen again. What he left behind, the Tao Te Ching, is the most translated book in human history after the Bible. It has been read by emperors and hermits, generals and monks, philosophers and farmers for 2,500 years. And its central message is so simple, so counterintuitive, so quietly devastating that most people read it 3 times before they begin to understand it, and a lifetime before they begin to live it. Stop fighting, stop forcing, stop pushing the river. The river was never going to change direction for you, but you can learn to move with it. Here is the shape of a life that most people in their 40s and 50s will recognize. You decide what you want, you make a plan, you push hard, harder than is comfortable, harder than is sustainable, harder than you would ever advise someone you love to push. You sacrifice sleep, ease, presence, spontaneity. You grind the thing into existence through sheer determined force of will. And sometimes it works. The goal is reached. The milestone is hit. The thing you wanted is yours. And then, almost immediately, it is not enough, or it is not what you thought it would be, or the having of it reveals a new gap, a new insufficiency, a new distance between where you are and where you now believe you need to be. And the cycle begins again. Lao Tzu watched this cycle in people, in governments, in empires, and identified it with devastating precision as the central source of human suffering. Not failure, not loss, not the hard things life throws at us from the outside. The suffering we manufacture ourselves, by fighting, by forcing, by insisting with the full, exhausting weight of ego and will that life arrange itself according to our preferences. Wu Wei, he called it Wu Wei, the way of non-forcing, non-striving, the effortless action of a person who has stopped fighting the current and learned, finally, to swim.
To understand Lao Tzu properly, we need to sit with a discomfort first. Because the Tao Te Ching does not give you steps, it does not give you a framework or a system or a productivity method. It does not tell you what to do, it tells you what to stop doing. And for a culture built entirely around doing, around achieving and accumulating and optimizing and producing, this is, at first, profoundly irritating. Lao Tzu anticipated this. He wrote, "The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao." In other words, the moment you think you have grasped it, packaged it, summarized it into something useful and actionable and shareable, you have already lost it. The Tao is not a concept to be understood. It is a way of being to be inhabited. And inhabiting it begins not with acquiring something new, but with laying something down. The relentless, exhausting, quietly devastating habit of fighting your own life. Let me tell you what the Tao actually is, as best as language, which Lao Tzu himself distrusted, can carry it.
The Tao is the underlying nature of things, the pattern beneath the patterns, the force that moves water downhill without effort, that grows trees without ambition, that turns seasons without schedule or strain. It does not hurry, and yet everything is accomplished. Read that again. It does not hurry, and yet everything is accomplished. This is not laziness. This is not passivity. The river is not passive. It carves canyons. The tree is not lazy. It reaches the light. But neither the river nor the tree is forcing. Neither is straining against the nature of things. Both are moving in complete alignment with what they are. Lao Tzu's invitation, his gentle, persistent, 2,500-year invitation, is for you to do the same, to move in alignment with what you actually are. Not what you have decided you should be, not what the culture has convinced you is required, not the performance, the persona, the relentlessly maintained image of the person who has it together. What you actually are. There is a verse in the Tao Te Ching, verse 11, that I have returned to more times than I can count. Lao Tzu is talking about emptiness, about the usefulness of what is not there. 30 spokes share one hub. Where the wheel is not, that is where it is useful. Clay is shaped into a vessel. Where the vessel is not, that is where it is useful. Walls with windows and doors form a room. Where the room is not, that is where it is useful. The usefulness of emptiness. Think about this in your own life. The conversation that only becomes real in the silence between the words. The relationship that breathes in the space where neither person is performing. The creative idea that arrives not in the frantic pushing, but in the walk afterward when you have stopped trying. The most important things in your life are not the things. They are the space around the things, the quiet, the emptiness, the unscheduled, unoptimized, productively useless hours that the culture tells you to eliminate and that are, in fact, where your actual life is happening. Most of us have scheduled the emptiness out of our lives entirely. Every hour accounted for, every silence filled, every spare moment colonized by a screen or a task or a low-grade anxiety about all the other things that still need doing. Lao Tzu would say, gently, without judgment, with the patience of a man who has watched empires make this mistake, that you have made yourself into a wheel with no hub, a vessel with no hollow, a room with no space to enter. Full of everything. Useful for nothing.
There's a quality Lao Tzu returns to throughout the Tao Te Ching that has no perfect translation in English. The word is pu, sometimes rendered as the uncarved block. Imagine a block of raw wood, before the carpenter has touched it, before it has been shaped into something useful or decorative or impressive. In its natural state, uncarved, unimproved, unoptimized, it contains every possible thing it could become. It is fully itself and fully open. Now imagine what happens as the carving begins. Each cut that gives the wood a particular shape simultaneously removes its other possibilities. Each decision about what it should be makes it less of what it was, and eventually, finished, polished, placed on display, it is one thing completely, and everything else it might have been, never. Lao Tzu is not saying don't become anything. He is saying be very careful what you carve away, and carve only in alignment with the grain of the wood, with what the material is actually asking to become, not what your ego has decided it should be. You are the wood. You are also the carpenter, and the question the Tao Te Ching asks with infinite patience in 81 different ways is whether the person doing the carving is actually you, or whether it is fear, or comparison, or the inherited expectations of people who knew you before you knew yourself. Now, let me build the bridge, because the Tao Te Ching was written for a different world, a world of emperors and river valleys and ox-drawn carts, and I want to translate it directly into the life you are living today. You are, right now, in the middle of a tension that Lao Tzu understood completely. On one side, the pull of doing, the culture's relentless insistence that the answer to whatever is wrong is more effort, more discipline, more pushing, more forcing the thing into existence through sheer determined will. On the other side, the exhaustion, the bone-deep, sleep-won't-fix-it exhaustion of a person who has been forcing for a very long time and is starting to sense, somewhere beneath the noise, that the forcing itself might be the problem. That tension, that exact tension, is the doorway the Tao Te Ching is pointing at, not the solution, the doorway. Because what Lao Tzu understood, and what every serious student of this text eventually discovers, is that Wu Wei, the way of non-forcing, is not a technique you apply, it is a direction you turn, a way of holding yourself differently in relation to your own life. Less grip, more trust, less insistence on a particular outcome, more attention to what is actually here. And in that softening, in that almost imperceptible relaxation of the fist you have been making for decades, something begins to move that forcing never could. So here is what the Tao Te Ching asks of you practically today. First, identify where you are forcing, not in dramatic ways. The Tao Te Ching is not interested in your dramatic crises. It is interested in the chronic, ordinary, invisible forcing that has become so habitual you no longer notice it. The conversation you control because you are afraid of what happens if you don't. The relationship you manage rather than inhabit. The way you approach your work, braced, effortful, armored, rather than open and responsive and curious. Sit with this question today. Where in my life am I pushing the river? Write it down. Just naming it, without immediately trying to fix it, is already, in the Taoist sense, a form of Wu Wei. Second, practice strategic emptiness. Once a day, create a pocket of genuine unstructured time, not rest scheduled between tasks, not meditation with an outcome, true emptiness. 15 minutes where nothing is required of you, and you're allowed to simply be. No phone, no agenda, no productivity, just you and whatever arises when you stop filling the space. Lao Tzu believed, and 2,500 years of human experience tends to confirm, that the most important things you need to know about your own life will surface in these moments, not in the planning sessions, not in the strategy meetings, in the emptiness, but only if you can tolerate the emptiness long enough to let it speak.
Third, follow the grain of the wood this week. There is something in your life right now, a project, a relationship, a direction, that feels like you are constantly fighting it into shape, forcing the pieces to fit, pushing against resistance that never quite resolves. And there is something else, something quieter, something you may have been dismissing as too simple or too small or insufficiently impressive, that moves easily, that asks very little of you, that flows. Pay attention to the second thing this week, not to the exclusion of your responsibilities, but with genuine, curious attention. Because Lao Tzu would say that the thing that flows, the thing aligned with your actual grain, is trying to tell you something important about the direction your life is asking to go. Fourth, let one thing resolve itself. Choose one situation in your life that you have been actively, effortfully managing, and for 1 week, stop managing it. Not forever, not irresponsibly, just step back, let it breathe. Trust that the river knows the way to the sea without your hands on it every moment. Notice what happens. Notice whether the thing you were sure required your constant intervention turns out to have its own intelligence, its own momentum, its own capacity to find resolution when given the space to do so.
Lao Tzu did not leave civilization because civilization was hopeless. He left because he understood that the wisest thing he could offer it was his absence, his non-forcing, his trust that what was true would continue to be true without his management of it. That is a radical act. It is also, often, the most effective one. I want to close with the image of that old man at the border crossing. He has spent decades at the imperial court. He has watched brilliant, ambitious, forceful men shape the world according to their visions, and watched those visions curdle, collapse, require more force to maintain, generate more resistance, exhaust themselves and everyone around them. And he has understood something they never did. The world is not a problem to be solved. It is a current to be read. And the person who reads it most accurately, who moves most lightly, most responsively, most in alignment with what is actually happening rather than what they need to happen, that person accomplishes more than all the forceful ones combined, and arrives at the end of the day still breathing, still here, still themselves, still capable of wonder. That is the way of the Tao. Here is the question I want to leave you with today. Not what do you need to do more of, not where do you need to push harder. Where in your life have you been fighting something that was never going to yield to force, and what might happen if, just once, you simply stopped? Leave that in the comments, because the answer to that question is not small. It is the beginning of everything. I'll see you in the next one.